Warzone. Be advised, right, the enemy team hunting you. Enemy UAV overhead. Hostile.
I've been asked to deliver this video a lot, especially after my last video talking about how to be as accurate as possible with a controller. And in this video today, guys, I'm going to be giving you a comprehensive guide of how to be as accurate as humanly possible with a controller, be a better sniper, be a better headshot ratio player, and just get more damage and get more kills. Now, playing Warzone on a controller is inherently difficult because although you have aim assist to some degree, you have to play against players who are using keyboard and mouse. So it's an analog-based input against a precise digital laser input, which is inherently more accurate. But it's entirely possible to overcome these hurdles with a number of settings that don't necessarily require you going out and spending £200 on a controller. Now, to give you guys a quick background, just because obviously if I'm telling you how to get 100% accuracy, you probably want to know, well, what does this guy have that makes this special? I actually currently have a headshot percentage in Warzone of approximately 40%, which means 40% of my shots on target end up being a headshot, and I have a headshot ratio of 35.1%. Those are the statistics from the official Warzone app and from warzonerank.com. Now, comparing this to some of the best players out there that I know, Stod, for example, Stoddy, as many of you will know him, is probably one of the most prolific snipers I've ever seen in Warzone. He does an incredible amount of damage. He's just one of the best snipers in any video game, in my opinion. And Stod actually has a headshot percentage of about 23% at the moment. Of course, that does go higher when he's using meta sniper rifles sometimes, but it just gives you an idea. You know, we're talking about a highly advanced PC player and myself being a controller player. I'm also currently averaging a weekly KD of approximately 4, which is pretty healthy, and regularly using the SPR sniper rifle. We are going to be talking about every single possible setting in Warzone that can affect your accuracy and make you a better controller player. We're going to start with the basic controller settings and move our way into visual settings, and we're also going to be talking about whether or not you should be using a specific professional controller, should you invest in a pro controller, and are these things that can actually improve your game. Now, for reference point, my accuracy actually hasn't changed between using a default PlayStation 5 controller and using an Astro C40 TR professional controller, which costs about 4 times the price. So this is possible with default control pads. So let's start with the controller settings. And controller settings are of course the bread and butter to all of your accuracy in Warzone and how you're going to get close to being as accurate as humanly possible. It's how I've achieved a near 40% accuracy ratio, which is pretty ridiculous if you think about it. That means every, 4 in 6 shots that I fire end up hitting a head. And the most critical setting in this sector is the response curve. Now, for those of you who don't know what a response curve is, a response curve is how your controller reacts to inputs. So for example, when you move your analog stick to the left or the right, how does it register that input and what level of acceleration does it witness on screen? So if I move my analog stick all the way to the left, how fast should it move all the way to the left? And that's what a response curve can do for you. It's a different way of interpreting accelerations of a controller input, and this is a critically important setting that you need to mess around with, because there are 2 settings in particular that will make you inherently a better player. And those 2 settings are the dynamic setting and the linear setting. I use the dynamic setting, so we're going to talk about that one first. The dynamic setting is a really interesting way of competing with mice, competing with players who use mouses in Warzone. And the reason for that is because the response curve and the way the stick accelerates is very similar to what a mouse player can achieve with DPI settings or just moving their mouse quickly. And effectively what this does is what I call snap aim. So if you've ever snapped onto a player, or you've seen me snap onto somebody's head, or you've seen me nail a ridiculous shot, it's because of this dynamic response curve. I can't tell you the number of times I've been accused of cheating, or people actually don't believe that I'm using a controller because of this setting. Now, what a dynamic response curve does, which you can see on screen here, and a big shout out to the exclusive Ace for actually mapping this chart, is what it does is the further away your stick is from the center of the analog stick is the level of acceleration you achieve. So if your stick is all the way to the left or all the way to the right, you will move move with the fastest level of acceleration. So if you're aiming left and right with this stick, it means that you can snap left and right exceedingly quickly. But when it gets to the center of the stick, the actual rotation speed or acceleration of the stick slows down. And this is critically important because it means you can make precise adjustments with your controller, such as aiming for a headshot, controlling recoil, and not having any weird drag to it, not having any weird acceleration changes that you would get with a standard curve, which you can see on screen. It means that more or less there is an entire central mass within the center of the analog stick where precise adjustments are humanly possible. And that's super effective and something that makes you a very efficient player. And you can snap left and right really quickly, and it means that you can effectively achieve mouse-like aiming. Now, the other one is linear, and the reason I mention linear because much like dynamic, you can achieve muscle memory with this. As long as you select one of these two options, you have two response curves that have a very... what's the word I'm looking for? A very formal pattern. A pattern that is identifiable and something that your body can adjust to in terms of moving your thumbstick. Linear, in my opinion, isn't as good as dynamic, but it's definitely a setting worth trying out. Dynamic may feel weird and floaty to some players, but I recommend you try it for a few days before you completely write it off. Whereas linear will feel a little bit more like the standard response curve, but because it's just a flat out straight line, it has much more potential for muscle memory. So absolutely change your response curve. It's hugely important in Warzone, and it will completely change the way you play. The next one we're going to be talking about is dead zones. Now, a dead zone is effectively how much input you need to put into your controller in order for something to actually react. So for example, if I move my controller analog stick slightly to the left, how far do I need to move it in order for it to actually register the input of me moving it to the left? Now again, we want precise precision aiming. We want to be able to make quick adjustments, headshots, and recoil compensation. So we need that dead zone to be as low as humanly possible, and my dead zone is set to 0.10, which is lower than the default amount and something I highly recommend. And I recommend putting the dead zone as low as you humanly can until you encounter what is known as stick drift. And stick drift is when you're not actually touching the analog sticks, but it's still registering input. So bump it just above the stick drift capacity of your controller. It may be lower than 0.10, it may be higher than 0.10, but you want zero stick drift, but with the most precise adjustments you can make on a controller, and a minimal dead zone will help you achieve mouse-like precision. And once you've found that number, do not change it. Try it for a couple of days because I guarantee you that you will notice a difference. You'll miss a lot of shots initially, but after you get used to it, you'll make more precise shots that you've never made before. And finally, I go for a 10 vertical and 10 horizontal in terms of sensitivity, and I use a standard parity between the two. And something worth mentioning here as well is that when it comes to various different zoom levels, when it comes to sniper scopes, when it comes to hip fire and all of that kind of stuff, you want your sensitivity to be the same across all of these. You don't want your sensitivity to change at all. And the reason for that is because you're trying to build muscle memory. If you pick up a 4x scope and it has a different sensitivity to a 10x scope, ultimately you will never build muscle memory. You'll have to build individual muscle memories for those individual scopes, and that just doesn't work. So don't change any of your zoom sensitivities. Finally, we have aim assist, and with dynamic response curve, I generally just use the standard aim assist, and I make it scale with the FOV, but we can talk about that a little bit later. As for the control scheme, I use the tactical layout, and if you're using a basic controller without any pro adjustments, I would recommend tactical flipped. Now the reason for that is very simplistic. Number one, the tactical layout effectively means that if you want to crouch or prone, you don't have to take your thumbs off of the thumbstick, and this is where professional controllers have an edge here. Now on my Astro C40 TR, I use the tactical layout, but I have the jump button hit to a back trigger, and I also have the crouch and prone and slide button to another back trigger, and that effectively means I can jump shot, drop shot, prone, crouch, prone, jump, pick stuff up without having to at all really remove my thumbs from the thumbstick, and that's really important if you want to maintain accuracy, especially in tense gunfight situations. So I absolutely recommend the tactical layout so you can avoid having to crouch, prone, and slide with taking your thumbs off the thumbstick if you're using a default controller. If you have a controller that has back triggers or some kind of remappable buttons, I highly recommend having other critical buttons such as jump or possibly even interaction buttons enabled on those back triggers so you never have to take those thumbsticks away. Now there are a few other settings that can affect your overall accuracy in Warzone, and we're going to briefly go over them because some of them are important and some of them are not. If you're playing on PC, your FOV can actually affect your accuracy. Having the highest possible FOV with an independent FOV setting effectively means that the visual recoil from most weapons kind of disappears. So if you've ever wondered why a PC player seems like they're moving quicker, or seems like their gun or AMAX has no recoil, FOV can be a factor within that. If you have a maximum FOV, ultimately the recoil kind of disappears in terms of the visual element of the recoil, so long as you're compensating for it. So having maximum FOV is definitely an option. I'm sure this will be available on PS5 and Series X in the future as well, so something to definitely bear in mind there. And the final thing that can really improve your game ultimately is investing in a more expensive controller. Now, I don't think you need a controller with all the bells and whistles like I do. I really don't think you need to go to that extent, but anything that has remappable back buttons is super important. Again, being able to achieve those jump shots and drop shots without having to move your thumbs off the thumbsticks is something that can really help you. And the number of times I've managed to, scope in and destroy somebody with a nice little crouch shot or like a jumping Car 98 tac laser jump shot. These are things that are all achievable, but you just need the right configuration for it. Ultimately, I don't think professional controllers really improve your game. Yes, you can continue to reduce the dead zones and sensitivities of the stick, and I've done a few of those things with some of my C40TR settings, like I've made the analog sticks generally more responsive, but ultimately, at the end of the day, that is something that can be achieved in the in-game settings. Like a basic PlayStation 4 or PS5 controller will fare just as well with these settings as my C40TR will. In terms of Xbox controllers, I really should know that if you're playing on PC and you have the choice of controller, I would use a PlayStation controller over an Xbox controller. Now, I don't know why this is a thing, and I've been talking about this for a while now, but Xbox controllers are, statistically, I would say, less accurate than PlayStation controllers on Warzone. I don't know why this is. I don't know whether it's a hardware thing or whether just Warzone handles Xbox inputs really strangely, but fundamentally what it does cause is a huge problem. And the problem it causes is that the thumbsticks on the Xbox don't have the same level of precision and precision adjustments as the ones on the PlayStation sticks. I don't know why this is a thing, but it absolutely is a thing, and it's something that I've consulted with numerous YouTubers about who all agree with me and have said the same thing. My final note on accuracy is to stick to one loadout and utilize it. Now, for those of you who don't watch loadout videos, in Warzone you want sniper rifles with maximum bullet velocity so that when the bullet leaves the barrel of your weapon, it hits your target as fast as humanly possible. I use the SPR, sometimes the Car 98, but the key factor here is building up muscle memory for those sniper rifles. You don't want to be guessing how far you need to lead your shot, whether or not your shot needs to be higher or lower, whether or not your shot needs to be a certain way. You just want it to be a muscle memory instinct thing, and if you use one sniper for long enough, effectively that is what will happen. I personally recommend the SPR because it is more or less a point-and-click cannon. It has one of the fastest bullet velocities up to 500 meters, which means that it's super good for getting accurate headshots, and it's just something I recommend checking out. So folks, that's about it for my 100% accuracy video. Fundamentally, it comes down to changing those critical settings in your controller layout, but there are things such as FOV and potentially maybe getting a pro controller that can make a difference. But the critical thing here is muscle memory. Change your settings, get a linear or dynamic response curve, reduce your dead zones, and then use those settings permanently. So long as you're not encountering stick drift on your controller, it means that you have the most precise possible settings in the game. And that means you can finally bring some parity to people who are using keyboard and mice. If you enjoyed this video or it helped you, please leave a like, please subscribe, and I'll catch you again in another video.